Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass, and today we're making a professional chiropractor connection with Dr. Jen Santos. Dr. Jen, can you get us started by just introducing yourself and also reflecting on that moment when you decided you wanted to become a chiropractor? Where were you at? What were you up to in life, and what attracted you to this path?
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Jen Santos. I have an office. I have three offices, one in Santa Rosa, California, Petaluma, California, and Napa, California. So we're kind of in the heart of wine country. Um, let's see. So we have three offices, 15 chiropractors, all currently Life West graduates working in my practice, with a special focus on the prenatal and pediatric scene. So that's a little bit about me. I teach for the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, which is ostensibly the authority on prenatal and pediatric adjusting. And I just recently stopped teaching at Life West. I had taught obstetrics, gynecology, pediatric pathology, and all that. So, yeah. What got me into chiropractic? I grew up in a chiropractic family. My dad was a chiropractor, and growing up, I just kind of always assumed that people saw a chiropractor because that was sort of our avenue in which we got into chiropractic. Like I would something would happen, whether it's a sports injury at playing Little League, or if we had a flu or, a sniffle or whatever, my dad would always be like, well, we need to get you adjusted. And we would get adjusted regularly. But then, especially when something would come up, my dad would be like, all right, we got to check you out. And that was sort of just always the norm for us. And so, growing up, I remember I didn't want to go to chiropractic college when I got out, and started looking at going to school for different things. I actually got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and the plan was to go either pre-law, go into being an attorney, or go into the enforcement aspect. And I decided about 6 months before I graduated college that I did not want to be in the chiropractic, or I did not want to go down the rabbit hole of law enforcement, or because what I wanted to do was help people live optimal, functioning lives. And really, enforcement sees people on the worst days of their lives. And so I kept kind of going back to like, okay, well, what else could I do? And about that time, my husband had started working in my dad's office, helping him just um, after his real job as a computer security. And he would come in and work on the computer for my dad's office. And around that time, my husband said, I've decided I want to go to chiropractic college. I love chiropractic. And I was like, you're insane. What I know about it is it's hard. It's really hard to go through school. It's hard to be in practice. And I said, I don't want anything to do with that. And we actually, he said, well, I'm doing it. And we were like, all right. Um, and so we ended up going to an open house at Life West. And there, Dr. Klum was actually talking about his chiropractic story. And he was talking about how, he had some vision problems, and that's his own story, but he had some vision problems, basically was expected to go blind, and his dad had taken him to a chiropractor and it got better. And so at that moment, I was like, huh, okay, that's interesting. Like, why wasn't he taking him to a chiropractor all along? Because that was my paradigm. And then um, shortly after the open house, I was driving to school with my best friend, and she was having a really bad migraine or something like that. And I said, well, what does your chiropractor say about it? And she goes, I don't have a chiropractor. And I was like, how do you not have a chiropractor? How are we really good friends and you don't have a chiropractor? Like, why? And and she was like, well, I've just never seen a chiropractor. Is that something that could help? I'm like, it's something that can help with your whole life. So yes, you should go see a chiropractor. So she started going to a chiropractor and started seeing my dad and never had a headache after that. And was like, this is amazing stuff. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. And so one day, my husband, we were looking at schools and trying to decide where to go. And all of a sudden, I just got this like, I'm going to. Um, and so I said, at this point, I was maybe 3 or 4 weeks away from graduating with my undergrad in criminal justice. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to chiropractic college. And so I started looking at what I needed to do as far as classes and like prereqs and stuff like that. Um, and looked at it and really, because my degree was a bachelor's in science, I didn't really have to take a lot of prerequisites. I think the only ones that I had to do at the time was organic chemistry and like one anatomy class. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And so I told my husband, like, I've decided I'm going to chiropractic college and I am going to specialize in prenatal and pediatric care. And he was like, well, you don't like kids and pregnancy grosses you out. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I'm going to do it. And it just made sense to me from the very beginning to specialize in prenatal and pediatric care because that's kind of where everything begins. And so really focusing on that. So going through school, the whole time I went through school, it was just very much so focused on the prenatal and pediatric aspect of care and chiropractic and all of that kind of stuff. Um,
There's a
yeah,
lot to unpack there. So, your upbringing, obviously getting adjusted as a kid and going to college and having this feeling that you didn't want to go and become a chiropractor like your dad. You did touch on a couple of the things that kind of scared you away from it or just repelled you away from the idea of following this path. But I'm wondering if you could tease apart the details of like when you decided you wanted to go and you looked back on your life and your upbringing and kind of like what you were bringing with you into chiropractic school. How did you begin to kind of shift your focus? Obviously, you were a criminal justice major at that moment. Like, how did you, I guess, prepare for chiropractic school, knowing in a very short period of time that you were about to begin and that you were completely changing the path, that trajectory that you were on? Like, how did you pivot? And, like, I guess, how did you embark on this path to become a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor once you got to school? Like, what did you study? Who were your mentors? What were the resources that really inspired you?
yeah. So I think the first thing is when I decided I wanted to be a chiropractor, um, really it went back and forth because I had watched my dad grow up. I grew up in the Mercedes 80s in the chiropractic world, which is like, chiropractors were billing $186 a visit. And my dad was making really, really good money. His practice was primarily car accidents, work comp, all of that kind of stuff. And so by the time there was some legislative stuff that took place with the work comp stuff, and so growing up, we had seen my dad basically with the a new law that was signed in for work comp. My dad lost about 80% of his practice overnight. And so my dad had to like reinvent himself into the chiropractic world. And I was like, I never want to do that. I want a stable job. Um, we were, my dad had 5 kids. And so we're looking at it going like, damn, like my dad went through all of this schooling and as a chiropractor and that's tough. And the biggest thing for me was I was talking to one of my best friends about how I was thinking about going to chiropractic college. And she was like, well, how are you going to get insurance reimbursement for babies with chiropractic care? And all of a sudden it was just like, I'm not. I'm never going to work with insurance at all. Like, I'm not going to do that. And so, as much as like growing up in the chiropractic world, like I knew a lot of the big names, a lot of the big, I knew the big why in chiropractic very, very early on. But I think it was at that moment that I realized, like, one, I could change the trajectory of what chiropractic looked like in my community and for myself. And so I made a very conscious effort from the very beginning. I was not going to work with insurance. And if you work with insurance and you're a chiropractor, like we can still be friends. I just don't get why you would choose to do that. And I understand the value for it. So, um, but basically, it was at that moment where I was like, I'm going to do what I want to do in chiropractic. I'm not going to do insurance. I'm not going to focus on work comps and PIs and anything like that. I'm going to focus on families, women coming into motherhood, and families being connected, and really focus on the optimum potential of each and every person. And so that was sort of the biggest aha moment, was just kind of like divorcing myself of what my dad's practice was for so many years, and it was awesome and beneficial for the people that he served and for himself, but really just having that permission to, like, I don't have to do that same thing. My practice is phenomenally different than my dad's was, and it's very intentional, to not be the same, although his was great for him.
Can you kind of just describe the crystallization of this practice that you've come to create? Maybe talk about like early on how you envisioned it as a student and how you started to develop it, and then getting into clinic at school, and maybe how it changed a little bit and how it became a little more real, and then getting out of school and what that transition was like of starting it and developing the brand and developing the clinical model, and maybe just describe in detail how it was unique and special and different.
Yeah. So my biggest mentor, well, you had asked a question about my biggest mentors. My biggest mentor in chiropractic college was Reggie Gold. If you haven't looked into him, not you, Ben, but other people, Reggie Gold is fantastic. He was considered like the philosopher of chiropractic. He had he had a story, that we use throughout school, that basically says, he kind of draws parallel between, if you are a refrigerator salesman and you know everything there is to know about refrigerators, and you have this store and somebody comes into your store and they say, hey, I'm not really looking for a refrigerator, but what I am looking for is an oven. Do you have any ovens? And the refrigerator salesman can pick at that point to either go out, buy an oven, come back into his office, into his shop and be like, here, I have this oven for you. Do you want it? Not really knowing anything about ovens. Or the refrigerator salesman can look at the person and say, I don't sell ovens, I sell refrigerators. I know everything you need to know about refrigerators, but my friend down the street sells ovens. So if you want an oven, I'm going to send you down to my friend and he'll get you taken care of. And if ever you need a refrigerator, come on back and see me. And he talked about that story about how there's sort of an identity crisis in the world of chiropractic. Like there's this idea that, oh, well, I have to be the holistic go-to for everything, right? And so pretty soon you're selling supplements, you're doing acupuncture, you're doing Reiki, you're doing all of these extra modalities in your practice that really isn't the only thing that chiropractors, many other people do Reiki, many other people do acupuncture, many other people, but the one thing that chiropractic does that separates itself is we adjust subluxation. And so that story throughout school, my husband and I, when we started school, we went through together and we would just look at each other and randomly just be like, I sell refrigerators. And that was sort of our own special, like, this is what we're doing. And so throughout school, we went through school just, I mean, it's hard. School is hard. It's a lot to manage and study and get everything done. And we would go through and just look at each other and, like, at the end of the day be like, we sell refrigerators, and remember why we were really there and what the purpose was. And so we started developing our practice while in school to really support the refrigerator sales model. And so what that looked like for us is, I'm of the opinion every man, woman, child, whoever deserves to be under chiropractic care, regardless of the presence or absence of symptoms. And so, because of that, we knew that we needed to make care affordable and accessible to people. So, what that was going to look like is, we were going to have the two of us in our practice, as much as possible, because then if somebody calls and wants to get in, we can see them and accommodate that, because we wanted that accessibility aspect. The other thing is, we wanted it to be affordable. And so, in order to make something affordable, we chose to be very low overhead. So we have no other staff in our office still to this day. All of our chiropractors kind of do everything in our office, but we have no other staff. So we don't have receptionists or CAs or anything like that. And going through school, that was very intentional of like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? So my husband actually wrote um, our electronic healthcare records, like, system. And so we keep track of all of our practice member or patient records on this thing that he wrote in school. He coded it. And it's really nice and simple, but people ask, like, oh, well, can we add this feature or this feature? And it's like, nope, we sell refrigerators. Like, this is what we do. And so, going through school, getting to the point where getting into clinic, because even that is very, like, I was coming as a quote unquote straight chiropractor, and I don't like the terminology, but, like, basically a chiropractor that wanted to adjust subluxation, and that was it. Stimulate nervous system, get the body functioning better, because we're coming from this inherent philosophy that the power that made the body heals the body. So because of that, going through school, when we would get into a situation where, we had to do 10 proctological exams to graduate, and it's like, we're doing it, and it's like, this is just such a silly hoop to jump through to sell refrigerators, and we would just laugh and look at each other, and we're like, we sell refrigerators. And getting to the point where we started adjusting people, you have to do, like, a certain amount of, like, clinical assessments or requirements. And that was even difficult, because the PT that we would have to do on people is not really conducive to what I wanted to do. And I knew it was just like, okay, whatever. So I think pretty much all of my PT visits in school were done on my husband, so that I didn't have to do them on other people. Not that I don't see value with that, and if you want to do that, that's great. But it was just, for me, that was something that I knew I really didn't want to do. So I had to just do that hoop and get it out of the way and whatever. And then in school, in clinic, when we started seeing people, just really focusing on our message and why chiropractic is so essential, and why we love what we do, and the rationale behind it, and teaching the philosophy on that. um because, and so that even forward, went into what we chose to do, which was, when we started our practice, we decided to do a membership model practice. And so basically what that means is, people pay a monthly fee and can come in as often as they need to come in. So there's no restriction necessarily on that, for optimal function and getting adjusted. And so people pay that monthly fee, they can come in, get adjusted, and um, and it's super straightforward, super easy. There's no hidden weird fees or hoops that people have to go through to sign up or cancel or whatever. But basically, the goal was to make it as affordable and accessible for people as possible. And so that's kind of the brand that we started with, and kind of kept that going. It was pretty funny in our um, business class in chiropractic college. We wrote up our exact model how we have it today, and fees, pricing, everything that we wanted. And we submitted it to the like launching your business course or whatever, and we got it back, and the teacher said that it was not a profitable way to have a chiropractic practice, and we would fail in practice, and told us to redo the assignment. And so we wrote it out, we fixed it, wrote it out, basically took my dad's chiropractic practice and wrote it on paper, sent it in, got an A, whatever. We ended up taking our failed business plan and opening our practice with that exact business plan. And we're now 9 years into practice, 3 locations and 15 docs. So I think we're doing just fine, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, most definitely. I was actually at school when you and your husband came to Life West, and I think you were transfer students because I was a transfer student, and I just
Yep.
remember being super aware of anybody else that decided to transfer. Can you maybe just, as unbiased, just give like an objective sort of reflection on how different the experiences were at the school you went to initially? Obviously, you weren't there as long as the second school you went to, but just kind of like introducing or building context for prospective students that like the school you choose does matter and the experience you're going to have is going to be a lot different. And if you want to have an as a juicy of an experience as possible, pick the right school so that you can be in that environment as long as possible and grow in
Yeah.
as deep of a way as you can.
Yeah. I mean, I think I actually got the best of both worlds, because every school has its ups and downs. Every school has its benefits and its downsides, right? Um, we first started at Sherman, which is in South Carolina. Both my husband and I are from Northern California. And about 3 months before we were supposed to start school, we found out I was pregnant. And so we ended up postponing starting school and having my baby, and then 2 months later, moving across the country and starting chiropractic college. Um, Sherman, what I will say, academically is really vigorous. It was a tough school. And it was as much as for my personal experience, it was interesting to go to a school that was very like academically rigorous. I mean, when we ended up taking our part one boards, um, I don't want to say boards were easy, but I feel like we were very well prepared for our boards, with that. There were downsides, for us. We weren't allowed to practice adjusting until you got into a certain class, and our class was moved, and so it switched it from a sixth quarter class that we would start adjusting people to a 10th quarter class. Um, and that just seemed way too far away for the art of chiropractic. The adjusting aspect is so essential and key to getting it. Luckily, and they can't take my license now, so whatever. Luckily, we would hold what we called Fight Club at our house every Tuesday, because the number one rule about Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, right? And so we would call it Taco Tuesday slash Fight Club. And so all of our cohort would come over to our house, and we would practice setting up on people and sometimes adjusting them, but basically like trying to better our craft, because and you weren't allowed to talk about it at school because you would get some time off if you were found adjusting outside of school. And so, I mean, we went to Sherman, we were there for 6 quarters, and then they started moving stuff around, and we were like, we have a baby that is growing up with his grandparents across the country. It's really difficult to go through school with a baby. And so we started looking at transferring to Life West. And when we transferred, it was just a totally different vibe. I mean, California is so different than South Carolina just automatically, but it's not just I don't know. I think Sherman is a fantastic school, and I do think the school that you pick matters. But I think that you can graduate from Sherman and be a fantastic chiropractor. I think you can graduate from Life West and be a fantastic chiropractor. And you get out, you get what you put in, right? And so, for me, it was all about in class, being in class, learning in class, getting my hands on people. And then something that I did when I got into clinic, when we transferred back to Life West, I had 14 student patients, and I kept all 14 of my student patients until the day I graduated, because I was looking at it going, well, as you are practicing, you're getting better and better. I wanted to make sure that as my student patients got me when I was not as good as when I left, I was a lot better. And so I wanted to make sure that they received good care, at least for a little while. But also, my thought was I wanted to adjust as many people as I could, because that's what I'm doing outside of this. And so by the time we went to graduate, it was there. What I will say is that I think because Sherman was academically so rigorous, it almost puts people in a us against them mentality. Whereas when we transferred to Life West, people were so gracious about sharing notes or, you know, um, information. Whereas I feel like at Sherman, it was definitely more like, oh, you missed that. That sucks for you. And that was just my experience. That was, I also was 2 months postpartum when we started and just trying to survive. But it was definitely, going through the schools and now having spoken at different schools and stuff, what I can say is I do think there's definitely a community that Life West has, that is special. I mean, we are still friends with a lot of the people we graduated with. We still talk to people. And I know, like, you were there at the same time, but it's just a different thing. Like, I know that if I ever needed something, I could be like, "Hey, Ben, could you help us with this?" Like, and it's like we're coming from this place, like, although we don't talk, but like there's just a bond that, like, oh, we went to Life West, and so like it's that, like, as cheesy as it might sound, that like Life West strong or Life West proud or whatever. I think generally speaking, graduates come from a place of like, you know, to give, to love, to serve, to do without expectation in return. And I think that that's a really good message, that Life West kind of is able to um, instill in a lot of the chiropractors, because it's really lonely to be a chiropractor by yourself. And having that community of chiropractors is fantastic. I mean, we don't do any work comp PIs, whatever, but I'm so happy to have people in our town that I know are good chiropractors to refer people to, because I don't want to do that. It's nothing, it's nothing, there's nothing wrong with ovens. There's nothing wrong with alternative things, healing modalities. It's just that I want to sell refrigerators. I want to do one job and do that really, really well. And
No, thank
so,
you so much. And not to interrupt you, but I just
yep,
want to be conscious and honoring of your time. Do you have another 10 to 15 minutes, or
yep,
are you about done? Yeah. Okay.
I'm good.
So yeah, you touched on the campus culture not being competitive but collaborative, or at least the camaraderie that's experienced by students in different cultures being different. And we'll just acknowledge that Sherman has a great education and Life West. Neither is better or worse. It's just all about finding your tribe, shall we say, within the student body and making the most of your time, even if it means hosting your own study groups or PALC groups or setup groups. Can we kind of just go into the skill sets that you've developed as a professional within the unique sort of niche that you've decided you wanted to focus your energy on? There's neurodevelopmental stuff, there's pregnancy stuff, there's kids going from being babies to toddlers to teens or young teens and everything in between. I mean, to run what's called the pediatric practice, there's really so many different special populations within that, or a family practice. Can you kind of just describe the different types of skills you've developed and the different types of scenarios that you've been able to experience? Maybe just whittle it down to 5 or 10 different types.
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, so definitely, I'll start with pregnancy because that's where it all begins, right? Definitely with pregnancy, having been through my own pregnancy right before we started school and really knowing nothing about um, that process. And I mean, my dad was a chiropractor, my mom was a nurse. So we grew up very much so always talking in anatomical terms. My dad actually taught us, we were homeschooled, and so he would teach us anatomy based off of x-rays. And so by the time I got into school, I was like, yeah, okay, I've seen x-rays before. Like this is obviously, and I didn't really have to learn like that aspect. But I think with pregnancy, having gone through my own pregnancy, when I got into my last my last month of pregnancy, my son was breech. And going through that and trying to learn what was happening within my body, he ended up being born. We did a home birth, like, most hippie chiropractors do.
Oh, did we lose Jen? Mm. Well, yeah, I just want to speak for her and to the pediatric pathway. If you're thinking about studying pediatric care and prenatal care, there's so much that's been developed for you, so many resources that have been developed that have really just come out in the last couple of years, like the Focus program with Dr. Amy Spolstra and the work that she's done to really create this Brain Blossom program of looking at the trajectory of the brain development of a baby that's fully healthy and also that's experiencing neurodevelopmental, neurosensory challenges. We've had Dr. Steph Williams come on here and describe all the different skill sets that she's been able to develop as a pediatric chiropractor and a prenatal chiropractor who really is dedicated to advancing her skills. And she recently just posted about being at Dr. Amy Spolstra's training that happened this past week. That's a whole movement within itself. And both Dr. Jen Santos and Steph Williams are involved with the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, which has done a lot to develop a structure where students who are interested in these types of practices can go through modules. I believe there's 16 to 20 modules that last or that take 2 to 3 years to complete. And then there's clinical hours that you have to apply the information that you learned in those modules in your clinic. And then there's actually publishing research for the types of cases that you've been able to observe and record data on in your chiropractic clinic, where you're able to show how you've made changes in the lives of kids and babies and pregnant moms and young teens and toddlers who have different challenges that they're presenting with in your chiropractic clinic. And you have the skills and training to identify where the underlying subluxations are, both in their spine and in their environment, and you are able to help them and document the help that you've given them so that you can then publish something that is maybe able to be shared with other parents or in other clinics. And that's what research has really become powerful, is if you have a research study that you can share with a parent that demonstrates chiropractic care being effective for their kid, then it just creates this ripple effect. So we got Dr. Jen back. Thank you. I appreciate your patience. I tried to riff for a moment on Dr. Steph Williams, Dr. Jen Santos, and Dr. Amy Spolstra, and the pediatric pathway that you can take with the ICPA or the Brain Blossom program, and just talk about the research that you eventually end up doing within the ICPA program. Are you hearing me clear or no? You're not hearing me clear. Why don't you leave and come back? Can you hear me better now?
Hello?
You can't hear me? I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? No.
Hold on. Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
No.
I can't hear you. Oh, can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No?